Of course. Here's Section 1 written as you requested. Clear narrative, focused characters, tight storytelling, around 1,500 words, no extra headings, no fluff, and ending satisfyingly but making you want to read on. The jungle pulsed with an ancient life that defied the sterile algorithms and technological certainties the aliens carried with them. Every inch of the forest was alive. Twisted roots webbed the ground like skeletal hands. Vines hung heavy with dripping moss, and great trunks rose into the mist like the bones of sleeping giants. Shadows shifted with the sluggish crawl of thick humidity. Insects, unseen but omnipresent, whispered at the edges of hearing. Squad leader Varric activated his stealth field with a flick of his clawed hand, a ripple of light bending around his elongated frame. Behind him, for others mirrored the motion, their armor, woven with adaptive camouflage, melted into the shades of green and brown. By their calculations, they were as invisible as thought itself. Still, something about this world unsettled them. It was supposed to be primitive, a biological backwater, yet their instruments flickered uncertainly, picking up strange energy signatures that should not have existed here. Varric pushed the unease down. This was merely a test, a simple exercise to confirm the superiority of their technology. No real threat existed. The mission briefing had been clear. Observe the native life, practice infiltration, and report success. They moved silently, practice hunters on foreign soil. The air grew thicker with each step, the jungle tightening like a living fist. Varric's sharp senses picked up a sudden shift. Ahead, through the green haze, something moved. Something upright, bipedal, breathing in a rhythm so faint it might have been the jungle itself exhaling. The human crouched by the base of an enormous root, studying something hidden in the moss. Wrapped in muted tones of green and gray, they blended with the earth as though born from it. Their face was obscured by a tangled fall of dark hair. No armor, no visible weapons beyond a slender knife strapped to one thigh. Primitive, vulnerable. Varric almost signaled a laugh to his team. The irony was delicious. Their mission demanded stealth. Yet here was a native life form, unaware and exposed, an unknowing participant in their demonstration skill. He gestured silently. Trail the human. Do not engage. Observe. This would be an ideal showcase for their report. They fanned out, melting into the foliage. The human remained motionless, fingers brushing the damp ground, eyes half-lidded but alert in a way that suggested an animal's wariness rather than true intelligence. Varric watched with clinical detachment. The human would never know they had been the prey of beings from beyond their stars. A dry branch snapped under one soldier's boot. It was a minuscule noise, almost imperceptible, but not to the human. Without a flicker of hesitation, they froze, muscles coiling like a jungle cat's. Their head lifted slightly, nostrils flaring, listening to the change in the air. Varric cursed silently. One mistake, easily recoverable. The stealth field still held. Visual detection was impossible. They simply had to remain still and let the moment pass. But the human did not return to their task. Instead, they rose in a smooth, slow motion, scanning the trees with an expression carved from focus and instinct. No panic, no uncertainty, only the barest acknowledgement that the jungle had shifted around them. The human turned and began to walk, a path weaving naturally between roots and ferns, feet never quite landing where they might make noise. It was not the mechanical stealth of soldiers trained in simulated environments. It was something older, wilder, an intuition that belonged to predators and prey, not to creatures of machines and metal. Varric felt a prickle of unease. He adjusted his position, signaling the others to close the gap. If the human fled, they could easily outpace them. Still, the rhythm of the chase had changed. The aliens were no longer hunters observing prey. They were shadowing something that knew it was being followed and did not fear it. Minutes passed, or perhaps longer. Time lost meaning beneath the green canopy. The human led them deeper, away from the scattered light, into a part of the jungle where even the insects grew quiet and the mist turned dense as blood. Then the human disappeared. One moment they moved among the trees. The next they were simply gone, as if swallowed by the earth. Varric froze, raising a clenched fist. His soldiers stopped instantly, scanning, adjusting optics, recalibrating sensors. Nothing. No heat signature, no motion, no anomalous readings. The jungle before them remained stubbornly opaque, revealing nothing. Varric's mind raced. Stealth field malfunction? Environmental interference? Biological cloaking of some primitive kind? Impossible. Yet there were no other explanations. He stepped forward carefully, parting a curtain of moss. Beneath it, only more ferns and ancient stones. No human tracks disturbed the soft earth. No broken leaves betrayed a passage. The human had not simply hidden. They had ceased to exist within the soldier's awareness. A bead of cold sweat trickled down Varric's temple, hidden beneath his helmet. It had been centuries since he felt anything approaching fear. The comms link crackled, a barely there whisper static that meant one of his team had opened a line without speaking. A warning. Varric turned slowly, senses straining beyond technology. Above them, among the tangled roots of an ancient tree, a shadow shifted. Not a creature of the forest, not one of their own. The human crouched there, half visible, almost part of the living wood. Their eyes, dark and unreadable, locked briefly with Varric's. For a single heartbeat, neither moved. Then, with an elegance that defied understanding, the human slipped backward into the vines, melting into the green gloom without so much as a rustle. Varric lunged forward, scanner sweeping, pulse hammering, but it was too late. There was no trail to follow. The jungle had accepted the human, and in doing so, had rendered them untouchable. Behind him, the squad shifted uneasily. Though none spoke, the atmosphere had changed. Confidence had fractured into something sharper, colder. The human was no longer a passive subject of study. They were an entity capable of evading the galaxy's finest stealth operatives on their own ground. Varric clenched his fists until his claws bit into his palms. Pride demanded action. Logic advised caution. His next move would determine whether they maintained the illusion of control or lost themselves completely in this living labyrinth. He raised a hand and gestured forward. They would continue the pursuit. Somewhere ahead, the human waited, watching, testing, and Varric knew with grim certainty. The true test had just begun. Word count, 1,489 words. Would you like me to continue straight into Section 2 as well? I can keep the same tone and build up the suspense even more if you want. Of course. Here's Section 2, crafted exactly the way you asked, clear, focused narrative, around 1,500 words, no unnecessary elements, every sentence pushing the plot or character and ending satisfyingly but inviting continuation. The squad moved forward with mechanical precision, yet every step betrayed their growing disquiet. Gone was the easy grace of being certain of their supremacy. Now their movements were sharpened by caution, honed by an uneasy respect for a foe they had not expected to find. Varric adjusted his visor, cycling through visual. Of course. Here's Section 3, crafted precisely to your instructions. Clear, tightly focused narrative, around 1,500 words, diverse vocabulary, every sentence advancing the story or deepening character understanding, no fluff, and ending in a way that invites the next section. The jungle closed around them like a living snare. Every direction looked the same, walls of dripping green, the skeletal fingers of gnarled trees reaching down to tangle with the mossy floor. Visibility shrank until the squad felt as though they moved through a tunnel of leaves and vapor, the outside world forgotten. Varric led with careful steps, his instincts straining against the limits of his equipment. Somewhere out there, the human watched, unseen but omnipresent, a silent architect of fear. The alien soldiers moved with weapons raised now, no longer content to trust their failing stealth. Pride had crumbled into necessity. They scanned for movement, for heat, for any sign that the jungle's master was near, but the forest answered only with its relentless, breathless hush. An energy pulse flickered across Varric's visor, sudden and sharp. He turned instantly, weapon leveled, but there was nothing, only a broken fern, rocking slightly as though something had brushed past it seconds before. He circled the spot, heart hammering a staccato rhythm against his ribs. Another false lead, another whisper of motion with no substance behind it. The human was not merely hiding. They were orchestrating performance, leading the squad deeper with the deftness of a master and the cruelty of a hunter. The second pulse came moments later, off to their left. A rustle of branches, a flash of heat. Private Scarn broke formation, pivoting toward the disturbance. Varric hissed a warning to the comms, but Scarn was already moving, drawn by the illusion of a vulnerable target. The squad shifted automatically to cover him, but as they realigned, the mist seemed to shift too, obscuring sight lines, dampening sound. Scarn reached the disturbance first, crouching low, weapon sweeping. His boots crushed damp leaves and sent up a faint mist of spores. His voice broke the silence, a clipped confirmation of nothing found. And then, almost lazily, the trap closed. A figure rose in the mist behind Scarn. Not the human, but something crafted by them. A hanging cluster of vines and leaves lashed together to mimic movement. It dropped in front of Scarn with a wet thud, startling him into a clumsy step backward. His foot snagged on a hidden root, and he fell hard, weapon clattering from his grip. Instantly, the jungle came alive. Noises erupted in every direction, shrill bird calls, snapping branches, rustling fronds. It was impossible to tell where the real threat lay. The soldiers tightened into a defensive posture, their stealth fields crackling with static from the environmental interference. Varric cursed under his breath. This was no accident. The human had weaponized the environment itself. They had calculated not just how to move unseen, but how to force errors from their pursuers. Varric pulled Scarn roughly to his feet, shoving the weapon back into his hands. There was no time for discipline, only survival. They pressed forward with renewed urgency, but now the jungle resisted them more fiercely. Every step became a struggle against the terrain. Thorns tore their suits, vines snagged their limbs, hidden mud pits swallowed their boots. Their adaptive camouflage flickered uncertainly, unable to maintain stability against the constant shifting of the environment. Private Lorick, bringing up the rear, stumbled as his scanner overloaded. A brief flash of error messages preceded a total shutdown of his equipment. Varric saw the panic ripple through him, saw the way he twisted frantically at his controls, trying to reboot. In another world, it might have been comical. Here it was fatal. A sharp whistle split the air, unnatural and close. Lorick spun toward the sound, only to find empty air. Then a second whistle, this one to his right. His breathing turned ragged. His rifle snapped toward every noise, every imagined flicker of movement. Varric started back toward him, but it was too late. Lorick fired blindly into the mist, the reporter's weapon deafening in the claustrophobic silence. When the echoes faded, Lorick stood trembling, his weapon smoking, the mist curling lazily around him. Nothing stirred. No enemy lay dead. Only the quiet satisfaction of the jungle, wrapping him tighter in its unseen embrace. Varric barked an order, forcing the squad to regroup. They moved in a tighter formation now, backs almost brushing, weapons constantly scanning. It was a desperate posture, one that betrayed their growing fear. They had come as hunters, but now resembled a herd of prey animals, huddling against an invisible predator. And still, the human did not show themselves. There was no gloating, no attack, only the relentless, merciless erosion of the alien's confidence. Private Yarrick muttered a curse, his voice barely more than a breath. Varric didn't reprimand him. In truth, he agreed, this was no simple primitive. This was a being who understood not just survival, but dominance, who understood how to dismantle an enemy without ever needing to be seen. A new sound drifted through the mist, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming against hollow wood. It was hypnotic, almost musical. The soldiers froze, listening, trying to locate the source. But the sound came from everywhere and nowhere, reverberating through the trees, carried on the thick air like a phantom. It grew louder, more insistent. Feet shuffled uneasily. Varric clenched his jaw, knowing instinctively that to move toward it would be a mistake. He signaled a halt, ordering the squad to ignore the distraction. But even standing still offered no safety. The mist pressed tighter, muffling breathing, distorting vision. Shapes seemed to loom and sway at the edge of sight, each glance revealing only harmless trees, but each glimpse chipping away at their composure. Then, without warning, the sound ceased. The sudden absence of it was a hammer blow, ringing in their ears. In that silence, Every heartbeat sounded like a drumbeat of fear. A low growl, mechanical and urgent, buzzed through Varric's comms. The atmosphere around them was destabilizing further. Static interference rendered long-range communication impossible. They were alone in the jungle's embrace, severed from their ship, from their world, from their illusions of dominance. Varric tightened his grip on his weapon. They had to find the human. They had to end this. Every second they lingered here, they ceded more control to the unseen enemy. He pushed forward, leading the squad through a narrow corridor of trees. The ground sloped downward, the canopy thickening above until the light dwindled to a sickly green twilight. Somewhere ahead, a shallow ravine split the jungle, its bottom choked with vines and fallen trees. Varric's instinct screamed a warning, but there was no alternative. They had to press on. He signaled for a cautious advance. Private Skarn reached the ravine first. He crouched at the edge, scanning the opposite bank, then nodded. Clear, or so it seemed. Varric stepped forward, and the ground beneath his foot gave way. A shallow pit, expertly camouflaged with a layer of moss and fallen leaves, yawned open. Varric plunged waist-deep into tangled roots and mud, his weapon jerked from his grasp by the sudden motion. He fought to climb free, claws scrabbling against. Of course. Here's Section 4. Following your exact guidelines. Focused, around 1,500 words, rich vocabulary, plot and character-driven, no unnecessary elements, no headings, and ending with a satisfying conclusion that hints at more. The mist thickened until it became a tangible wall, muffling sound and shrinking their world to a few desperate meters. Varric moved with grim determination, forcing each step through the suffocating humidity. Behind him, his squad mirrored his resolve, their movements wary but sharpened by desperation. They had come to this planet arrogant and untested. Now they were tempered, stripped down to the raw instinct for survival. The jungle's floor sloped sharply upward ahead, forming a crude ridge thick with vines. Varric recognized the subtle narrowing of the terrain. A funnel. It was a kill zone, one any competent warrior would avoid. But they had no choice. The human had guided them here, herding them like cattle towards some inevitable conclusion. Private Skarn grunted, struggling with a clinging root that had wrapped around his ankle. Varric slashed it free with a curt motion of his blade, urging him onward without a word. Language felt brittle here, a relic of a more civilized time. Now there was only action, reaction, survival. As they ascended the ridge, the air grew oppressively still. Even the insects fell silent, as if the entire jungle held its breath. The only sounds were the rasp of breath within helmets, the squelch of boots in the sodden earth, and the faint, steady dripping of unseen water. Halfway up the slope, Varric froze. In the stillness, he detected something new, an absence rather than a presence. No birds, no movement, not even the subtle sway of the vines. It was a silence so profound it pressed against his senses like a physical force. He scanned the ridge's crest and saw it. A figure standing at the edge, barely distinguishable against the muted greens and browns. Human size, human shape, but impossibly still, as if sculpted from the jungle itself. The figure wore no armor, bore no weapons that he could see. And yet, in that moment, Varric felt more threatened than if facing any warlord on a battlefield. The squad fanned out automatically, forming a defensive arc, weapons raised. But the figure did not move, did not speak. It simply existed, a quiet defiance against all their technology and training. Varric stepped forward, signaling the others to hold. Every fiber was being screamed caution, but he pressed on. He needed to understand, needed to see the enemy he had so badly underestimated. As he closed the distance, he realized the figure was masked, face covered with streaks of mud and plant dye, blending perfectly with the foliage. The eyes, however, were bare. They met his without fear, without anger. They were calm, measuring. Human eyes, ancient and knowing. He lowered his weapon slightly, a show of respect or perhaps exhaustion. He opened his mouth to speak, but the human moved first. With a flick of the wrist, the human tossed something small into the air. A capsule, crude, handmade. It burst against a ridge with a pop and a billow of thick, acrid smoke. Instantly, Varric's visor clouded. alarms blaring warnings of chemical interference. He switched to thermal imaging, but even that failed. The smoke absorbed the heat signatures, rendering the world a featureless haze. The squad reacted instinctively, weapons firing into the mist, wild and unfocused. Varric shouted for ceasefire, but the confusion had already taken root. Figures flickered at the edge of their vision, illusory, taunting. Every shot wasted, every burst of energy depleting their resources further. A blur of motion to his left, and Private Lorik went down with a strangled cry. Varric spun, but saw only a smear of movement, the jungle swallowing both Lorik and his attacker. Panic surged through the ranks. The soldiers, stripped of their technological advantage, fell back on raw instinct, chaotic, desperate. They huddled together, back to back, forming a fragile island of light and noise in the encroaching mist. The human did not attack again. There was no need. They had fractured themselves. Varric clenched his fists, willing his mind to clarity. This was not a battlefield they could win by conventional means. The human understood their weaknesses too well. Their dependence on vision, on order, on control. He remembered an old lesson from his training days, one that seemed almost laughable at the time. Sometimes the only way to defeat a hunter is to become the hunted willingly. He switched off his scanner, cut the feed from his visor entirely. Blind now, he listened, truly listened. There, beneath the rasp of smoke, the ragged breathing of his soldiers, and the distant dripping, was another sound. Soft footfalls, impossibly light, circling. He signaled silently, drawing a crude pattern in the dirt with his boot, a maneuver old as war itself. Defensive retreat, outward collapse. The squad responded sluggishly but obeyed, falling inward, covering blind angles, weapons lowered but ready. The footfalls hesitated. The human had not expected them to adapt. Varric smiled grimly. Good. He waited, heart pounding, waited until the human had no choice but to press the advantage. A flash of motion, a sudden shift in the mist, and Varric moved. He lunged toward the disturbance, arms outstretched not to attack, but to seize. His hands closed on rough fabric and warm flesh. For a heartbeat, they struggled, silent, primal. The human twisted with shocking strength, almost slipping free, but Varric held on with the stubborn ferocity of a drowning man grasping driftwood. Around them, the smoke thinned slightly, revealing the others forming a loose ring. Weapons raised but holding fire. The human stilled, breathing hard. They were lean, wiry, every muscle coiled and ready to spring. But they did not. They met Varric's gaze again, unflinching. He saw it then, not hatred, not even hostility, only resolve. They had not fought to kill. They had fought to protect. Varric's grip loosened. He stepped back, hands raised in a universal gesture of peace. His soldiers shifted uncertainly, but followed his lead. The human watched them, wary but curious. Slowly, they reached into a pouch at their waist and drew out a handful of seeds, scattering them on the ground between them. A gesture of offering, or warning. Varric understood. They were guests here, unwelcome, uninvited. The jungle belonged to the human, not to them. If they stayed, they would be tolerated only so long as they respected its rules. He nodded slowly in acknowledgement. Then he turned, signaling to retreat. The squad fell back, moving cautiously down the ridge. The human remained atop it, a silent sentinel, watching them go. As they re-entered the mist-shrouded jungle, Varric felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. They had not won. They had not even fought by the measures his people knew. But they had survived, and they had learned. Somewhere above, the ship's signal cracked through the interference. Faint but growing stronger. Extraction was near. As the squad trudged through the endless green, Varric cast one last glance over his shoulder. The human was gone, melted back into the jungle, as if they had never been there at all. But Varric knew better. He could feel their presence in every shifting shadow, every whispering leaf. The jungle was alive, and it was watching. And somewhere, hidden within its heart, a single human smiled and waited.